My name is Dr. Timothy Kearns. I'd like to first thank Father Ed Simbala and the committee for inviting me to speak at the Byzantine Ruthenian Metropolitan Assembly. The title of my talk will be From Light into Light, a Theological Cosmology for Our Time. I teach at a Roman Catholic seminary in Cheshire, Connecticut, and my specialties or my main work is on the integration of knowledge and the unification of disciplines within a broadly patristic and Thomistic framework. From Light into Light, a Theological Cosmology for Our Time. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of the Christian life? Why did God make us? And why did God make us the way he did? Why ultimately did God make the world the way he did? And what is the place of human life in the created order? Are we just called to go through life trying to stay faithful, trying to avoid sin, all in the hope of heaven? Is human life merely a spiritual test, and the cosmos itself only a spiritual testing ground? These are hard questions to answer in our time, and that fact reveals a crisis of meaning. The popes of the 20th and 21st centuries have spoken of this crisis, that we have lost any sense of our place in the universe, or even of the universe itself as anything more than a stark emptiness, vast and varied beyond anything imaginable. And those same popes have called for Catholic theologians and philosophers to articulate a renewed vision of the universe and a renewed way of living as Christians based on that vision. In one way, the Eastern Catholic churches are particularly well placed to articulate such a vision. Our tradition emphasizes the pre-modern liturgies of the church and the wider teachings of the Holy Fathers, who were themselves concerned to see as a whole the cosmos we inhabit, made of spirit and of matter. What the Eastern churches can do for the world is to draw the sciences and discoveries of our age into a theological vision rooted in God's own nature and his plan for the world, a renewed vision of the cosmos that presents a patristic and liturgical account of the creation and an accompanying way of living according to that vision. Summing up as he does the whole patristic tradition and keen to see the cosmos as creation, even the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas will find a true accord and a genuine complement in the formulation of a cosmology like this. This renewed vision of the cosmos and a way of living it out I will outline here, with fear that I am not up to the task, and at the same time hope that my own two mites, like the widow's treasure, may for someone suffice. I begin with the first and greater part, the theological cosmology in general. Part 1, a renewed cosmology. All truth is ultimately simple, like God. So we should expect the truth about our place in the world and the order of creation to be simple too, and it is. We must begin at the beginning. Indeed, we must begin before the beginning, with God alone. Why did God create? The Christian tradition is clear. God created in order to communicate himself. And it is with this simple truth that we can renew our vision of the cosmos as a whole. Everything in what follows depends on this. It is like a key that opens all the doors. So let us consider it in detail. Start by thinking of a human artist. The artist can only make something that comes from inside himself in some way. He's always making something that he already possesses. And so his making of the work, by its very nature, contains something of himself. This means that every work of art always communicates something from the artist, and in however small a way, reveals him in his work. But no work, even of human art, can ever reveal perfectly or completely the man who made it. Even what the artist possesses in his mind, his idea of the work to be done, is always contained in a different way in the artwork he is making. And the material of that work can never completely capture even the artist's own idea of it. For example, Michelangelo's idea of David is different from what he was able to make in that great statue. But whatever the statue is, was given to it by Michelangelo and by the material that he used. Michelangelo's idea of David was more than what he was able to put into that statue. Part of the reason his idea was more than he could make into that statue is just that the material he was using, marble, has its own characteristics and its own defects, both of which limit what Michelangelo could do. Another part of the reason his idea of David was more than he could put into that statue is just that he could not put everything of his idea of David into only one statue, since there are different ways to capture the same thing, and an artist must choose. There is thus always more in the mind than can be put into the work. So a human artwork is always something from the artist, and what the artist is able to make is always something less than the idea of it in his mind. This is true. But it is also true that a human work of art can sometimes be more than is in the human artist. This is because the human artist does not make the material that he uses, he only uses it. And that material can combine with his idea to make something that is more than either one alone. A simple example of this is in an art like poetry. A poet might make a poem and use certain words, and those certain words might contain a connotation or an implied allusion that the poet himself was not aware of. His words can therefore have more in them than he intended. In general, then, a human artwork always communicates the artist and is always in some way less than the idea in the artist's mind, and can sometimes contain more than was in the idea of the artist due to the material out of which it is made. Compare this now to the divine artist. As with human artworks, the divine artworks, the creatures God has made, must communicate part of God himself in some way, since such works are made according to what is in the artist's idea of them. Again, like the works of a human artist, none of God's works can ever fully communicate God. But unlike the works of human art, where the matter that the artist chooses can add something more to the thing than was strictly in the artist's idea of it, there is no way for any of the divine artworks ever to be more than God's idea of them. This is because God makes from nothing at all. There is no matter for God to use in any way, or better said, matter is part of what God's artistry makes. Many human artists are prolific. They have much that they wish to make, and so they have much in themselves that they communicate through their works. But how much greater is the desire of God to communicate himself, and how much greater is that which he can communicate? In one way, the simplest kinds of artworks to make are those that are one of a kind, where the artist places his idea in matter as well as he can, and that is it. God, too, creates some things like this. According to the Fathers and St. Thomas, these creatures, related but one of a kind, each unique and unrepeatable, each simple and pure, are the angels. What the angelic nature reveals in general is the stability and changelessness and fixity of the one who made them. But works unique and simple are not all that artists can create. Imagine an artist that wishes to communicate as fully and perfectly as possible his idea of something complex enough to be unsuitable to be made as a single unique work of skill. The simplest thing for the artist to do would be to make many artworks of the same idea, but differing from each other, and each embodying in a slightly different way the idea that he wishes to make in art. In other words, the artist would make the same work over and over, each revealing something different, and all of them together revealing more and more of the whole of his idea. There are divine works of this kind, and these we know well: particles, elements, compounds, stars, planets, waters and plasmas, microbes, fungi, plants, animals, and humankind. Think only of the many human faces and the uniqueness of each one to see that in the huge variety of men there is a witness of the fullness of the divine idea of man. But an artist may also wish to communicate himself rather than only one of his ideas. To see this in God, first consider all the works of art that the first unfallen man, Adam, might have created in the world. These many works would each have communicated one of Adam's ideas, yes, but in their breadth and variety, they would even have communicated Adam himself. Through seeing all that he made, we would have known something of the man. And Adam would not have done this to aggrandize himself the way we see in some artists of our age. Rather, Adam's unfallen works would have communicated him in all his glories, unwounded, and through him they would have ever communicated the whole of the created order, from the angelic powers to the circles of the elements. Now consider God as artist and God's works as his own. The nearly limitless variety and profound multiplicity of things created, from hosts upon hosts of angels to the myriads of stars and galaxies, from unexplored planets and the vast space in between the stars, to the 350,000 species of beetles that are known, and the panoply of plants that flower, and even to the many works of man whose heart is tortuous beyond all else. All of these, taken together, communicate to us God himself, more even than any single idea or any unique creature ever could. And as with unfallen Adam, this superabundant diversity is filled with goodness and light. As even in the works of human art, God is more than all of these. To communicate himself, then, God sought to create a world of boundless forms and uncounted individuals. God created the heavens and the earth, and like the vast ocean, even empty space communicates God by causing us to wonder at its sheer size and the nearly limitless possibilities within it. And let us take this to its radical conclusion, just as the fathers of the church did. Even the rocks and dust, even the particles of air we breathe, even the hydrogen atoms fused in a burning star, all of these bear the imprint of the one who is, and all reflect him. The fathers insist that nothing is truly evil, not even the devil. All that is good, for all that is what God made. Everything is good because everything communicates the one who is goodness itself, for he made them all. But created things do not just communicate God because of what they are. They communicate God in how they are, in what they do, in the changes they go through, and in the acts that characterize them. And those acts can only reflect God or communicate him if they are real acts of the things themselves. We might be tempted sometimes to think that God, as all-powerful creator, is the one who directly causes everything to happen the way it does. Much popular spirituality has come to emphasize God's will and abandonment to that will. There is, of course, something good in this, but there is also a mistake. The mistake is that although God could have determined everything to be directly by his will, in fact, he did not. But why not? The reason takes us back to our beginning, before the beginning. A world of static creatures, mute and blind, a marionette theater of things seeming natural but with no power to move, could never best communicate the God himself who speaks and sees and moves all things. The powers that created things have the things that they can truly cause all come from God ultimately. On that we must never cease to insist. But God is generous, and he gives the power to change and to cause change even to the lowest things. From the simple act of God as creator, we discover what it means to be a creature. To be a creature means to be something good, made by God from nothing and given real power to change and real activities within oneself. This then is the world that God has made, the created world in the moment and the first made things, made to be like the one from whom they come and to communicate him. And here we are seeing God's creation as if it were from the inside. We see that God has left nothing unmarked with himself. In a created order like this, one of generosity and giving powers to things themselves, the greatest kind of power God gives to some created things is the twofold power that is closest to his own. The power to direct other things together according to a plan, and the power to make something that has not yet been made. There are many ways for all the things God created to be made and ruled and ordered, many shapes the unfolding of time and the universe could take. That is part of how all things reflect God, by being so full of possibilities, so full of the ways that all different kinds of things could come to be. The universe is like its creator. That is part of how all things reflect God. By being so full of possibilities, so full of the ways that all different kinds of things could come to be, the universe is like its creator. But within all the possibilities of what created things can be, God calls them to take a certain order, a course for what they are to be. If God had created the world so that only one plan could be achieved, so that no other order of things were possible, then that world too would lack a certain likeness to him. That universe, where all can only come out one way, would have nothing in it that reflects God's own capacity to direct and to guide all things through myriad possibilities to an ordained end. Instead, God has made a world of possibilities, and in it, he has formed a design that, among all the possibilities for the unfolding order of that world, communicates again, somehow specially, himself. And for the unfolding of this order and the guiding and directing of it, God could well have executed the design himself, bringing about each stage of that order by direct divine acts. But in his generosity and in his desire yet again to communicate himself in every way, God created a host of governing spirits. God created angels. And he made the angels as messengers of himself, in praising him and communicating him to each other, in directing what is to be made, and in guiding what is made to God's own appointed end, an end that is not so much far away in distance as it is a whole universe away in time. The angelic powers are not creators, and never could be creators, for that is God's alone. But they are able to cause things to be made, able to realize one among the many possibilities that God has created, and to govern aspects of the world according to the divine plan. That is their ministry. Summing up many threads of the doctrine of the fathers, St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that angels are able to cause, in fact, the forms of all natural things, not by creating or emanating them, but simply by moving other natural things and their parts, and through that motion, causing something new that was made possible by God's creation, but not yet realized. From St. Augustine, St. Thomas draws the doctrine that contained within the first natural things that God created are the seeds of other things, beyond them, that the angelic powers are able to bring about over time, not again by a spiritual emanation, but because the spiritual powers are able to use the natural things that God first made to cause to be the other and newer things as yet only possible. And this coming forth, as it were, from seeds, we can see in the history of humanity and the history of the earth and the history of the universe itself. But there is here another key point that we cannot lose sight of. Only God can make the spirits themselves, and only God can make the first material things. Angelic powers can use the natural things God first made and direct them to other things according to the divine plan, but that is all. Compare what the angelic powers can do to what we can do. We too can create nothing, but the wonders of the human mind and our capacities for making new things out of what we find before us is practically limitless. Imagine then the power of the angels to make in that first beginning, even though all that existed were the natural things that God had created, and which he had created to contain the seeds of everything else. The greatest human artists can have no comparison with them. We do not know what those first natural things of matter were that God himself made at the beginning, things altogether that were again so much like him that within themselves their assemblage contained the whole of what nature would come to be. But we need not be left entirely with speculation. Modern cosmology tells us that in the first moments of creation, all the matter and energy in the universe was contained in almost a single point. And from that single point came everything else. What came from that single point was not just one possibility among many. What came from that single point was an unfolding order, guided and directed by the heavenly powers toward the ends that God has set before his ministers. And no matter what the scientific story is that we can tell, the key point here is this: God created the first natural things at the beginning and gave the direction and guidance of them to the angelic powers to draw forth from them the forms that he had created, as if from seeds, according to his design. This is the witness of Genesis, that the making of the material world was in a progression over time. And it is the witness of the Bible and tradition that the angels govern the world and direct it to its end. Governing the world and directing it to its end is the mission of the angels, but not all God's ministers would serve. There was a war in heaven. What we know about that war is very little. But we know that the greatest of the angels fell like lightning, and that many followed him in rebellion. A rebellion in the presence of God might well seem strange, but it is only a consequence of God communicating himself to creatures in such a way that they participate in his power. There is no way that great governing spiritual powers of pure intellect can freely serve unless they have the possibility of not serving. And that possibility, some of them chose. These angelic powers became what St. Paul calls the rulers of this present darkness, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. But how can they be rulers if they have rebelled? The answer is that they seek to rule for themselves and in their own way. Those spirits that remain faithful to God are not rulers for themselves, but ministers of the one from whom all things come. And the rule of the fallen angels is not true rule, since all true rule comes only from the one who rules all things. The rebel angels have turned their power away from the plan of God and sought to make the world of nature serve their own ends. And in this grasp for power, what may surprise us is that the rebel angels were not at once defeated or driven out wholly from the world. Why? Why does God permit them, even now, to seem to rule? The reason is that their rebellion makes possible greater goods, goods that outstrip by far the evil they could ever have caused. Even rebellion has been taken into God's plan. But the question for us is this: what happens when some of those who govern the world refuse to govern and seek rather to distort, tear down, and mar? The cosmos we know is marked by struggle. The old stable cosmology of Aristotle and Ptolemy revealed little evidence of great forces and huge spaces of emptiness, of elements forged in exploding stars, of asteroids smashing into planets, of the cold and lifeless reaches of space, or of supermassive black holes from which not even light escapes. Let me be clear that all these are natural things, and every one of them is in itself good. But that the universe has taken these extreme forms makes that universe a gigantic and hostile realm, where almost nothing could ever live anywhere within it, and in which even the one place where life has found a home is temporary and subject to danger and destruction. The star about which we move, for example, will one day swell to the size of the orbit of the Earth, and nearly every trace of living things and humankind will have already been long gone. The furthest objects in the universe are all accelerating away from one another, not just moving away at speed, but racing away from one another faster and faster, and no one knows why. Among living things, too, we see this even more clearly. The struggle for life is already very old, and many forms have lived and died, and no corner of the world is without this. The cosmos that science has revealed to us is not the stable universe of clearly evident balance and harmony that the fathers of the church knew, although the world we know now is clearly not chaotic, and even its violence reveals an order deep within. The fathers were rarely concerned to state the details of the accounts of the fallen spirits as in a cosmic war, except when they spoke of that most important war, the one for the souls of men. Some did ask, however, why man would be made with such a fighting spirit if he had been intended only to dwell forever in the paradise of Eden. Despite this reticence among the fathers, we can now scarcely see a region of the universe untouched by constant change, nor can we see a region whose very existence does not depend precariously on great forces beyond itself. This reveals the world to be, in one way, as St. Paul says, the creation was made subject to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious freedom of the children of God. The universe's end, as far as can be told now by current science, is likely to be a cold and empty waste, with every star burned out and all the matter far away from everything else. But we know that this will not, in fact, be our universe's end, because God created it for increasing order and for the bringing out of new forms, all of which are impossible in the end that the sciences describe, an end which is only a long twilight without even the potential for new things and other order. And of course, such an end as the sciences predict is not the kind of end that the scriptures foretell. Instead, the scriptures speak of a last battle and a new creation. And to the question of why the cosmos, itself such a reflection of God's likeness, should ever come to be brought to an end, and why there should be a new heavens and a new earth, the answer is that only such an end reveals God's ultimate sovereignty over creation and the ultimate supremacy beyond all else of the divine plan. Creation can be put off like a garment, rolled up like a scroll, and opened again to something new. So even the passing away of the whole created world reveals the everlasting will of the one who made it. At the heart of the cosmos, then, is a struggle that has left its mark on everything we know. We cannot say in detail how the world has come down to have the form it does, and we must be careful not to say more than we can have reason to. We cannot know how creation is, as St. Paul says, made subject to futility, or what it will mean when the world is freed from the bondage of corruption. But the world and nothing in it is evil. On that we must insist. In the natural world, however, we cannot fail to see that life is precarious and precious. Violence and disease are everywhere, and our own planet is subject to destruction, and the universe is nearly tearing itself apart. What we must hold to is both the reality of the goodness of creation, even in the presence of what may seem to be great evils, and also the reality that some of the governing spirits of the world have turned away from God and seek to thwart the divine plan for the world. They cannot cause anything evil to be made, but they can cause to be made goods that oppose one another, and goods that oppose or seem to oppose the plan of God for the world. And this is precisely true of wicked men. For all their intent, they can make nothing really evil, but what they can do is turn good things in the world against each other. Note well, however, that the opposition of goods and evils is itself part of the distinction and governance of creatures designed by God. So in itself, the struggle and change which mark every natural thing is part of the nature of material creation, divinely ordained. Thus, what it is that could reveal the struggle between these powers is not the fact that there are goods and relative evils at all, but rather what the forms are that those goods and their accompanying evils take, especially the extreme forms we see now in nature. Much more than this, we simply do not know. But however the fallen powers may try to warp created things or thwart God's plan for the world, there are others that are ready at God's command to resist, the faithful ministers of the hosts of heaven who did not fall away, fortified now with grace and beatitude. Any struggle between these powers that marks itself on the world of natural things will always be a struggle between two goods, since the ministers of God have been given the mission of directing all things toward the end that God has appointed. But none of this are we able to see directly with our own natural eyes. We can see only the world of nature that we know, with its great harmonies and cold hostilities, its delicate balances, and its violent surges of force. And it was into this world that God created man and placed him in a garden. God made man as another form of possibility to communicate his goodness. But this time, the form was like God himself in a special way. This one form unites matter and spirit, and so stands at the center of the created order in a way that nothing else does. Even of itself, human life, the life of the mind and heart, the life of action in the world, the life of mothers and fathers, communicates God as creator, because we unite in ourselves the two great parts of the created world, spirit and matter, the spirit that governs and the things that are governed. So just as another possibility in the world, another form, just as one more kind of the myriad kinds of living things, humankind is unique. But humankind is not just another form. To see this, ask what the purpose of the natural world is without man. Imagine a world of fantasy, written by the greatest of our authors, full of vast mountains and narrow crevices, of sunrises over oceans, of twilight over forests, but all with no living animal to live in them, and no living animal to wander over their face. Such a world would be unfinished. Or imagine such a world filled with creatures of every kind, but with nothing rational to look upon it and see their beauty, to know its truth, and to wonder about the cause. The natural world and its unfolding, directed by angelic powers, what is its purpose if there is no man? The highest mammals, with senses keener than our own, can perceive the world and live in it, and cleverly pursue benefits akin to their nature and avoid harms. But beyond their experience, they can see nothing, and thus they never look at something in the world of their experience and wonder whether it is true. Stars and nebulae are magnificent, but without man there is nothing in the world to see their goodness or to wonder at it, and nothing that actually needs that goodness or can use it. Living things are beautiful and varied and valuable, but not even the highest of the higher animals can really know the world or other creatures or themselves. Much less can they know God. They cannot perceive God's goodness communicated in all things. This man alone of living things can do. This is why God's creation calls for something that is at the same time like an animal, but higher than any other animal, and like an angel, but lower than any other angel. The angelic powers govern the world and direct it according to God's plan, but what is most capable of being governed in the world is natural things and matter. And of these, the heavenly powers can only make use of for some purposes that are not their own. For they have no need of matter and of natural things, and although they guide the development of nature, the angelic powers remain beyond it. Only man can use created things for his own ends. Animals cannot know the Creator, and angels cannot make use of his creation. Man seeks his own good as image of the Creator, and he does this through what he knows. And with his knowledge, he employs created things to realize his own potential, especially for the fullest kind of life for himself. This life is perfected by the efforts of men in their assemblies to use creation to present again in a new way the glory of their Creator and his creation in their works of skill. What is greatest of all in the stories of our writers is when the kingdoms of men overcome great calamities and unite together in a time of peace, building, learning, and art. And so it is with men in history. To show forth his own goodness in the fullest way, God created man. But God does not just create man in a perfect world, realizing only man's possibilities to communicate God through human nature. God creates man in a garden, but that garden is in a world of immense forces and mass extinctions, of colliding planets and hordes of parasites. God creates man not just to play the role of communicating himself in a special way within the great masterwork of creation. God creates man as part of the unfolding of the divine plan. God's call to man at the beginning to fill the world and subdue it was no idle call. God made man with a mission to master the natural world, to overcome its distances and times, its hostilities and violences, and to put such great forces themselves to use. The use to which man is made to put those forces is just that which is given by what man himself is. Man uses his knowledge of the Creator and his creation to present again the glory of that Creator and his creation through works of skill that themselves perfect the powers of man and the powers of all those natural things which man orders together. In short, what man is called to do is to turn the cosmos itself into a temple, where man himself can render praise to God and all other natural things can find their due order and perfection in being precisely ordered to that end. The making of the world into a temple is something that not even the highest angels can do, for the simple reason that they do not dwell in any place, and the songs they sing are intellectual. The angelic powers can guide and direct the natural world, even to causing natural things to be made, but what they cannot do is sing in natural sound, or dwell in a place, or build a home, or tend a garden for themselves. And in this temple that man is to make, heaven and earth are to be brought together. The spiritual world is to be communicated both in the physical order of the temple and in the fact that humankind unites in itself the intellectual singing of the angels and the songs of natural things. This was to be humankind's mission, but like some of the greatest powers in the universe, we too would not serve. The fathers and doctors of the church have taught us wisely at length about the fall of man and how our salvation is achieved by grace. Here, what is most important is just this. The temple that we were called to make of the cosmos before the fall was always in one way limited, a place where we as men could sing and live forever, but a place too where God would not be one with us, at least not without something else besides. This is as far as our mission could have taken us itself. But in Eve's response to the serpent, we can see that something more was hidden in us, the desire to be like God. Many fathers of the church suppose that this is also the desire that Satan and his rebels had, and that they rebelled when they saw in a flash that God would grant this greatest gift to a lower creature than themselves. What the devil and his angels saw in that moment may have been the scandal of God's goodness, the opposite of the problem of evil. How can there be such great goods in the world given to what is not the highest? The answer to this question is, as so many of the others, implied in why God created anything. God made all creatures from nothing and gave us creatures each and in our different kinds all the goods we have. And the only way to have a creation that can communicate its maker is to have distinction among what he made, differences among creatures. And that means there must be goods that belong to some and not to others. And that greatest good of all, the divine nature itself in person in Christ Jesus, was given to us in the fullness of time. It is likely, according to the Holy Fathers, that God would have come in person to unfallen man, to unite man more fully with himself, but we do not know how that would have happened or what form the means of that union would have taken. What we do know is this: God united himself with man in Christ and made possible our salvation through his life and teaching, his death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and finally his gift of the Spirit. The Spirit rushed upon the apostles and now rests upon their successors, and through the ministry of the sacraments, we are able to become like God, that, as St. Peter says, through these promises you may be partakers of the divine nature. And in the words of St. Athanasius, God became man so that man might become God. That is what should be said in short summaries of the sacraments. But there is one thing that this simple statement of the great mystery of faith misses, and that is just the connection between, on the one hand, human life and the sacraments and what both make possible, and on the other hand, the cosmos as a whole. And that is the second part of this theological cosmology. Part 2, a renewed practical anthropology. Let us return to mankind as one form in the created order that communicates God, the way an artwork communicates the artisan. Animals cannot know the Creator, and angels cannot make use of his creation. Only mankind can do both, and only mankind especially can use his knowledge of the Creator and his creation to present again in a new way the glory of that Creator and his creation by mankind's works of skill. This is what mankind is in relation to the cosmos, and this kind of creature is what Christ's death and resurrection transforms. But in transforming mankind and making it possible for him to become divine himself, God has not only restored mankind to his lost place in the order of creation, God has transformed what is possible for the whole created world itself. I repeat, in redeeming man, God has transformed what is possible for all creation. How so? God has now entered the world in person and made it possible for the created world not just to communicate him the way an artwork communicates its maker. God has made it possible for the created world to be ordered into a temple and a service through which God himself comes in person and by nature, something impossible before, and now made possible in person in Christ and in sacrament, in the sacrifice of the altar. And the whole created order rejoices that its master and maker has come into it and now dwells within it as a temple. But even more than this, because God has given us the sacraments, he has made it possible for even the lowest things to communicate him mystically, at least in some way. Water, oil, bread, and wine, and all the things that come together with them in the temple and the service, like gold and incense, silk and brocade, stone and wool and wood. The lowest things, too, can serve their God. And this is the centrality of the divine liturgy, not only to our redemption, but to the perfection of the universe itself. Through it is made possible the radiating of God's presence and nature throughout the world from within. Above, I said that like a human artist, none of God's works can ever fully communicate him. In one way, however, even this limit God has breached by uniting the divine nature with man, since in that God's works can carry even the artist himself to those ready to receive him, even if God can only be carried forever and forever to those who receive him and are filled but with more to receive, overflowing, but losing nothing. And this is the greatest possible work of art, that a work could really communicate not just the idea of the one who made it, but the one who made the work himself. But man is not only liturgical. Humankind is also an animal, living in a fallen and dangerous world, a world of great beauties and severe pains, of a struggle for life, and of a vast space of stars and galaxies, and whatever lies beyond them. All the arts and skills and endeavors of humankind to live in the world, to be stewards of nature, to care for the sick and the poor, to educate themselves, to produce great works of skill in wood, image, word, figure, and place, and to strive to live together in justice and in peace, all of these are part of how we as creatures live and fulfill our role in the order of creation and in the plan of God. Every good human act is taken up in this, and every good human act is perfected when it is recognized as being part of the fulfillment of God's plan. No matter how small the act is, no matter how seemingly mundane or insignificant, the central truth of our redemption is that everything we do can communicate God, and the world no matter how small the act is, no matter how seemingly mundane or insignificant, the central truth of our redemption is that everything we do can communicate God and make the world more and more into his temple, and finally draw us up into the divine nature itself. There is one more line from Scripture and the Fathers, taken up by St. Thomas too, that can help to lead us upward away from the modern and secular vision of humankind. It is not just the case that Christ makes it possible for us to perfect creation in a way new by the entry of the divine nature into the world. There is one more perfection, albeit a lesser perfection, that God makes possible for us. One more way, but the world reveals him. The sacraments make it possible for humankind to transcend nature, but that transcendence itself leads us through somewhere. It leads us to become, in the new creation, more than stewards. It leads us to become governors of the world itself by taking the place of the fallen angels in the ranks of the heavenly host. A creature of matter will, by grace and supernature, take a place inside the heaven of heavens itself to exercise in the world a spiritual rulership over matter. This is the generosity and the wisdom of God. And this is perhaps the most radical gift of all for us to imagine. We do not really understand what it means to be partakers of the divine nature, and so we agree and wonder at that truth. But it is easier for us, at least, to imagine the great heavenly court and the hosts of angels and their great powers in the world, and so it is a cause of almost greater wonder for us that humankind should be able to join that host. One can almost imagine a contemporary Christian hearing this and saying that it is too much to believe, too radical a generosity on the part of God, too strange to think that a mere animal should by grace come to take up a place with the powers of heaven. But here we must beware, for God's generosity has been a scandal for others before. Even here, though, in the ranks of the heavenly host, we will not simply replace the fallen spirits, but somehow, mystically, we will perfect what those places ever could have been. To see this, consider the place in heaven of the Theotokos and ever-Virgin Mary. She does not merely take the place of the one who fell away, and the place she takes is no doubt the highest one that was forsaken. Rather, she perfects that place beyond itself, and through the place that has now become truly her own, she is able, through the grace of her Son, to be even in the order of creation what nothing could have ever been before, the mother of life and the queen of heaven. In the meaninglessness and despair of our time, what the church brings to the world is not ultimately just a message of hope. The cosmos itself proclaims our redemption to be radical, to go down to the root of the world, and to lead us beyond the grave to an age where we will sit upon thrones. And at that time, as St. Paul says in a question, do you not know that we will judge the angels? How much more, then, the things of this life? What all this shows is a network of cosmic and theological truths. These truths reveal the centrality of the divine liturgy and of local churches as assemblies that carry out that service. They also show the place of human practical efforts in the world as part of the human mission to turn the world into a temple and to live together in harmony as we do. They show the perfection and dignity and power of our nature, not as what rules natural things like a master, but as what brings the divine into space and time. And finally, they show us the true mission of the whole human order, of every people and institution, to make the world into a temple more and more for the one who is. These truths have practical consequences. Many of them are widely known and are what Christians have always done. The works of mercy, conversion of heart, prayer, fasting, and giving alms. But some of them have been lost sight of, with a host of new discoveries. So let me sketch here consequences that follow from these truths, but are more particularly what we need to see in our time and what we can do in the kind of world that we now inhabit. The Sunday Divine Liturgy, led by a successor of the apostles, a bishop in his church, is the center of the world. The Sunday Divine Liturgies in local churches are what most directly perfect us for our larger efforts to turn the whole world to God's glory. Every effort should be made to privilege and promote this liturgy, to unite the faithful around it, and to reveal over and over what its true place in the order of the unfolding of creation really is. Local churches should center around a single Sunday Divine Liturgy. The celebration of Matins and Vespers should be encouraged, since those make us ready for our participation in the Divine Liturgy. They also sanctify time and space because their celebration extends the service of the altar beyond Sundays and holy days. The Liturgy of the Hours is the key to how ancient and medieval Christians were able to live with a constant awareness of their place in the cosmos and of the gratuity of God's gifts to us and of our own destiny in Him. The sanctification of time can be encouraged among the laity by a simple means. Instead of asking the laity to pray the whole Matins or Vespers or even part of them, laymen can be invited to pray the daily Kathismata of the Psalter, And if this is too much, let them only pray the first verse of each psalm. This is an ancient custom and is something even the busy father or mother can do. Beyond the explicitly or implicitly liturgical, Christians should be encouraged to garden and participate in making a garden around the church, a garden of the Theotokos, to invoke the new Eden, and a garden of consolation for the remembrance of those who sleep in Christ, and the consolation of those who await in joyful hope that coming sleep that will be their own. Christians should likewise engage in stewardship of the natural world as Christians and in a Christian way. This is one key task we were explicitly given by God. Anyone who asks what a Christian does in our time should be told that, in addition to the works of mercy, prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and study, Christians are good stewards of what they have and of where they live. And all these efforts should be undertaken explicitly as ways of living out our place in the order of the universe. Same is true of the arts, since in these, more than in nearly every other effort, we imitate our Creator. Churches should be centers for the arts, especially those related to the service of the altar, but more than those besides. This all presumes a renaissance of Catholic education, both for our children and for ourselves. People must be taught to see the cosmos again as a place rich with meaning and profound beauty, overflowing with the signs of God, and a constant challenge to us in our mission to turn it into a temple for the one who is. People must be taught the scriptures and tradition and how to interpret both. But this education should not only be theological or religious. One key to understanding the time that we live in now is to realize that we live in the greatest renaissance of learning in human history, without exception. There is more study, learning, reading, writing, arguing, researching, exploring, experimenting, measuring, and analyzing going on right now than at any point in history. In earlier generations, the education in the faith that most Catholics received was suited to their place in the world, and that place was on farms and in villages, in factories and workshops. But now the proliferation of knowledge makes the old system of teaching simply obsolete. Priests and bishops should promote learning in the churches in every possible way, both the study of the divine things and the study of nature and the human world, since both of these ultimately reveal God. Finally, and most radically of all, what this theological cosmology shows, and what everything I have just proposed requires, is that Catholic churches become real communities again. If young people have no friends in a church, and no one their age, and no one that they might marry, then the only thing for them to do is leave, since in a literal way there is no life for them in such a church but what is on the altar. And what is on the altar may well be more than all the worlds combined, but it cannot be received that way if there is no one to receive it. Nor is this just a matter of the young. How many times do we think about ministering to the old? They need friends and conversation, good food, and a place where they can be of service. And such things simply cannot happen without people, first of all, people who have a desire to come together and serve. The cosmology I have outlined is one in which everything that exists serves God in its place. All such service cannot be rendered only abstractly or according to a plan, even a divine one for the world. All such service must be given in love for the one who is served. We love the ones we serve because they already communicate God, whom alone we truly serve. Recall to mind Christ's own commandment. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. In the end, a theological cosmology like I have articulated here may be an answer to the crisis of meaning of our time. But without love, no one will hear it. Thank you.